My husband had me committed, making me look like I was crazy. The pills worked perfectly. I finally sent that crazy woman to the asylum, and I'll keep all her money, he told his lover. But the idiot overlooked that crazy woman never took those damned pills, and so my plan for revenge began. Juliet held a cup of tea between her trembling hands, the steam rising slowly and disappearing into the cold morning air. Her eyes, red from tears and insomnia, stared out the dining room window. Outside, the leaves fell to the rhythm of the autumn wind, but inside her mind, everything seemed stuck, trapped in a storm of pain and confusion. Since her parents' death, her life had turned into a series of endless days, laden with sadness and loneliness. Cristiano walked into the kitchen, his smile seemingly full of tenderness. He approached from behind and planted a kiss on her head, but Juliet barely reacted. "Love," he said softly, "you need to get up. I know it's been hard, but I promise you'll get through this." Juliet nodded slowly, without taking her eyes off the window. She felt that the weight on her chest was becoming more and more unbearable, as if every comforting word from her husband only deepened her sadness. "It's not that easy, Cristiano," Juliet whispered. Her voice barely seemed her own, as if it came from some distant, forgotten place. "Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe." Cristiano sighed, pretending empathy, but inside, there was something much darker. He had been planning everything for weeks. As Juliet sank deeper into depression, Cristiano saw the perfect opportunity. He knew she wasn't aware of what was happening around her. Her vulnerability was the fertile ground for his next step. "Listen," he said, standing up and walking toward the kitchen cabinet. "The doctor gave me these vitamins. He said they'll help with your mood. They're completely natural." Juliet looked at the pills in his hands. Something inside her told her not to take them, but she trusted Cristiano. Why wouldn't she? He had always been her refuge, the man who held her up when the world was falling apart around her. So, with a forced smile and searching for some glimmer of hope, she extended her hand and took the pills. "Do it for yourself, Juliet." "Please," Cristiano said softly, leaning down to kiss her on the forehead. "Everything will get better, I promise." Juliet swallowed the pills with a sip of water and returned her gaze to the window. Something inside her resisted, but the desperation and desire to feel better pushed her to trust him. The first day she felt nothing, but as the weeks went by, Juliet began to notice that her mind was slowing down, her thoughts becoming confused. Sometimes, she struggled to remember where she had left the keys or whether she had eaten. Other times, she felt like the walls of the house were closing in on her. And then came the voices. At first, soft whispers she couldn't understand, but then, clearer, speaking into her ear, accusing her, mocking her. "What's happening to me?" she wondered as she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her reflection showed someone she no longer recognized. She looked older, more fragile, as if life itself was consuming her. Cristiano, for his part, appeared more concerned than ever. He brought her flowers, held her in bed at night, but in reality, he was savoring every minute of her downfall. He knew that the more deteriorated Juliet became, the easier it would be to convince others that she wasn't in her right mind. He had already contacted Dr. Montalvo, a psychiatrist friend who, for the right price, would do whatever he needed. One afternoon, as Juliet sat on the living room couch, completely lost in her thoughts, her best friend, Sophia, appeared at the door. Sophia was the opposite of Cristiano, loyal, sincere, and above all, concerned about Juliet since her parents' death. "Juliet," Sophia exclaimed when she saw her. "My God, you look terrible. What happened to you?" Juliet looked at her with glassy eyes, trying to remember the last time she had seen her friend. "I don't know, Sophia. I don't know what's wrong with me," Juliet murmured, her voice trembling. "Cristiano says it's just nerves, but I don't know." Sophia frowned and quickly approached. She took Juliet's hands and felt them cold, as if something vital had gone out in her friend. "Juliet, this isn't you," she said firmly. Something else is going on here. This isn't normal. Always observant, Sophia noticed the bottle of pills on the living room table. She picked it up and read the label. In an instant, something in her expression changed. Without a word, she walked straight to the kitchen cabinet. She rummaged through the boxes until she found a second bottle, identical to the first. "What are you doing?" Juliet asked from the couch, a bit scared by the expression on Sophia's face. Sophia returned to the living room with both bottles in hand and sat down in front of her. "Juliet, how long have you been taking this?" she asked in a tense voice. "I don't know. Weeks. Cristiano said they were vitamins, that they'd make me feel better." Sophia gritted her teeth. She knew something was wrong. This wasn't a simple vitamin, especially with the symptoms Juliet described. Without saying another word, she stashed the bottles in her purse. "I'm going to look into this, Juliet," she finally said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Trust me." Juliet looked at her with a mixture of confusion and relief, though part of her already felt defeated. What if she really was losing her mind? What if all this was just her mind playing tricks on her? However, something in Sophia's eyes gave her hope, a spark of fight that had been extinguished in her for far too long. As Sophia left, Juliet sat in thought, looking again out the window, but this time, for the first time in weeks, she felt that maybe there was a way out, a truth she hadn't considered. Meanwhile, Cristiano, at work, received a message on his phone. "The doctor is ready," the text said. A crooked smile formed on his lips. Soon, it would all be over, and Juliet would be out of his life, or at least, that's what he thought. Juliet sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers playing with the edge of a frayed blanket, while her mind tried to piece together the broken fragments of her life. It had been 3 days since Sophia took away the pills, and though she felt a slight mental clarity returning to her life, the fog was still there, heavy, suffocating. Every sound, every shadow that moved through the house seemed to pull her closer to an abyss she didn't know how to avoid. Cristiano, meanwhile, had started acting more distant. It wasn't the first time she noticed, but now, after the conversation with Sophia, every gesture, every look from him seemed to carry a double meaning. It was as if, instead of her husband, she was seeing a stranger, someone who had been plotting something dark all along without her noticing. "How are you feeling today, love?" Cristiano asked as he entered the room, with that soft voice that had started making her uncomfortable. "Better," Juliet replied, her tone dry, without looking at him directly. "I think the pills had me a bit off." Cristiano paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on her as if he were assessing her response. He knew Juliet had stopped taking them. He could see it in the small spark of lucidity that had returned to her eyes. His plan needed to move forward before things became more complicated. "It's only temporary," Cristiano said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The doctor says it's normal to feel this way at first, but if you continue the treatment, you'll soon be better." Juliet pretended to believe him, but inside, something was stirring. She no longer trusted him or his supposed concern. Everything she had felt as unconditional support during her depression was crumbling like a well-constructed lie. However, she said nothing. She knew it wasn't the right time. As the hours passed, Cristiano became more distant, busy with phone calls and mysterious meetings. Every time Juliet tried to approach him, she felt an invisible barrier rise between them. Her intuition, dulled by pain and drugs, was beginning to awaken. Something was not right. That same night, while Cristiano was in his private office, Sophia appeared again, this time with a much more determined look. "Juliet, we need to talk." Her voice was firm, almost urgent. Juliet led her into the living room, where she turned on a dim light to avoid alerting Cristiano to their conversation. The two sat on the sofa, and Sophia pulled bottles of pills from her bag. "These are not vitamins," Sophia said gravely. "They are strong sedatives mixed with other substances that, over time, could make you seem unstable." Juliet felt a lump form in her throat. She knew it. Deep down, she had known all along, but hearing Sophia's words was a slap of reality that left her breathless. Unstable? Juliet repeated, unable to fully process it. Are you telling me that Cristiano? Sophia nodded gravely. Yes, Juliet. I'm afraid he's been planning this all along. He wants to make you look crazy. And if that's not scary enough, I've found out more. Your fortune is under his direct control if you're deemed incompetent to manage it. Juliet felt everything around her crumbling even more. He wasn't just destroying her mentally, he was doing it to take everything. But how? Juliet began, but her voice broke. I loved him, Sophia. How could I not see it? Sophia took her hand, a mixture of compassion and anger in her eyes. It's not your fault, Juliet. He's been playing with your pain, with your vulnerability. But now that you know, we can't stay still. Juliet, unable to hold it back, let out a sob. The sadness she had accumulated for weeks was transforming into something else, something colder and harder, anger. She took a deep breath, feeling determination begin to replace despair. What can I do? Juliet asked, her voice now firmer. Sophia looked her in the eyes, her expression serious. First, we need proof. He's not going to stop until he gets you out of here. And I think he already has a plan in motion. We need to be ready before he acts. That same night, while Cristiano slept soundly, Sophia and Juliet began searching through his papers. They knew Cristiano's office was full of important documents and emails, but they couldn't risk going in there without raising suspicion. Instead, they went through his laptop. Sophia, being clever and having some technical knowledge, managed to access some files Cristiano had forgotten to password protect. What they found was devastating. An email to a psychiatrist, Dr. Montalvo, read, "Everything is going according to plan. Juliet has begun to show the first signs of instability. In 2 weeks, I will submit the report confirming her incapacity to make decisions, and we will proceed with her commitment. The money will be secured. Thank you for your help." Juliet read the email with her heart pounding in her chest. It was as if the world was falling apart again, but this time not from sadness, but from a controlled fury that began to take over her emotions. What do we do now? Juliet asked, her voice trembling, looking at Sophia. We have to act fast, her friend replied. You can't stay here much longer without him realizing you know. But we can't rush it. You have to pretend, Juliet. Pretend that you don't know anything, that you're still that broken and lost woman he thinks you are. And in the meantime, we'll plan your escape from the situation. Juliet nodded. It was a dangerous game, but she had no choice. She knew Cristiano wouldn't stop until he saw her completely destroyed, but now she had an advantage. She knew the truth. The next morning, Juliet woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She pretended to take the pills Cristiano had left on the table, acting as if everything was the same. Cristiano watched her with his calculated smile, sure of his control over her. I'm going to talk to the doctor today, Cristiano said casually as they ate breakfast. I think it's time for a more detailed assessment of your progress. Juliet nodded, hiding her fear behind a docile expression. That's fine, she said in a soft voice. I'll do whatever it takes to get better. I trust you, Cristiano. Cristiano smiled, satisfied with her response. What he didn't know was that Juliet was no longer the broken woman he thought she was. Now, every word, every action she took was measured, calculated to avoid raising suspicion. She knew the battle was about to begin, and she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Cristiano left the house that morning, convinced that his plan was working perfectly. But Juliet, still sitting at the dining table, let her smile slowly fade as her gaze filled with determination. She was ready for what was coming. Later that day, Juliet walked through the backyard of the house, her steps slow and deliberate. The fresh morning air brushed her face, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm she felt inside. She looked at the flowers, the same ones she had tended with so much care for years, but now they looked wilted, forgotten. Everything that had once brought her joy and peace was now a reminder of what she was losing. However, she couldn't allow herself to fall back into the abyss. She had come too far to be defeated by pain. Inside the house, Cristiano was on the phone in his private office. He had been spending more time in that room than usual in recent days. Juliet, pretending to follow her usual routine, approached the slightly ajar door. She heard his voice, low, almost whispering, as if he feared someone might overhear. "Everything is going according to plan, Montalvo." Cristiano's words were sharp and cold. "In a few days, I'll present the report. With any luck, by next week, Juliet will already be admitted. I need you to have everything ready to avoid complications." Juliet felt a chill run down her spine. She clenched her fists to contain the anger boiling inside her. She knew she was close to losing everything, but she wasn't going to let that happen. With her heart racing, she quietly stepped away from the door and returned to the garden. She had to stay calm, had to keep playing her part. That afternoon, Sophia arrived at the house again, but this time there was something different about her face. There was urgency, a sense that time was running out. They sat together in the living room, where the soft light of the sun filtered through the curtains. "Juliet, we need to speed up the plan," Sophia said in a low voice, looking directly into her eyes. "Cristiano is ready to present you as incompetent before the court at any moment. We can't let that happen. Do you have anything else we can use against him?" Juliet nodded slowly, remembering the recording she had secretly made during one of her conversations with Cristiano. "I have something," Juliet said, feeling her voice tremble slightly. "I managed to record a conversation between Cristiano and me. He admitted his plan, though not directly, but it's enough to raise suspicion." Sophia looked at her with a mix of relief and concern. "That's a good start, but we need more. We need something that puts him in a position where he can't escape. It has to be so damning that even his contacts won't be able to help him." Juliet knew Sophia was right. The recording was an important piece, but not enough to fully dismantle Cristiano's plan. He had to be exposed, revealed to the world. But to do that, they needed time, and that time was running out. "I think Clara can help us," Juliet said suddenly, a spark of hope in her eyes. Clara was a nurse at the psychiatric hospital where Cristiano planned to have her committed. Juliet had met her during one of her first consultations, when Cristiano took her there for her own good. Since that moment, Clara had shown a strange sympathy toward her, as if she knew something wasn't right about the situation. "Are you sure we can trust her?" Sophia asked, caution in her voice. "I'm not sure," Juliet replied, "but Clara is the only person I've met in that place who seems to have doubts about all of this. Maybe if I explain what's happening, she'll agree to help us." Sophia nodded slowly, though her concern was evident. "We have to try. If Clara can give us access to any information inside the hospital, we could get ahead of Cristiano. We need to move fast, Juliet." That same night, Juliet called Clara. It was a tense conversation, full of silences and careful answers. Juliet couldn't say much over the phone, knowing Cristiano might be monitoring her communications. But in the end, she managed to get Clara to agree to meet her outside the hospital the next day. When morning came, Juliet pretended to feel worse than usual. She feigned dizziness and a sense of weakness that made Cristiano lower his guard even more. Everything had to seem normal, as if his plan was working perfectly. While Cristiano left to prepare everything with Dr. Montalvo, Juliet and Sophia headed to the meeting place with Clara. The cafe was half empty, giving them the privacy they needed. Clara arrived in her uniform, her face serious and full of concern. As soon as she sat down, she looked directly at Juliet. "What's really going on?" Clara asked bluntly. "I know you're not crazy, Juliet. From the first moment I saw you, I knew. But if you don't tell me the whole truth, I won't be able to help you." Juliet sighed deeply, feeling her hands tremble on the table. She looked at Sophia, who gave her a silent nod. It was time to reveal everything. "Cristiano is making me out to be crazy so he can take my money. He's been manipulating me ever since my parents died. The pills he was giving me weren't vitamins, they were sedatives. He convinced Dr. Montalvo to diagnose me with a mental illness I don't have. And now he wants to have me committed to the hospital to control everything." Clara narrowed her eyes, absorbing every word. Her face showed a mix of disbelief and anger. Do you have proof of all this? Clara asked, still cautious. Juliet pulled out her phone and played the recording she had made of her conversation with Cristiano. As Clara listened, her expression shifted from doubt to steely determination. I can't believe it, Clara murmured. I knew something wasn't right, but this is much worse than I imagined. Sophia, who had been silent until now, spoke up. We need your help, Clara. Cristiano has a lot of influence and power. If Juliet enters that hospital under the conditions he set up, she won't be coming out anytime soon. You have access to information that could be crucial. Records, documents, anything that could prove the report Cristiano is going to present is false. Clara thought for a moment, biting her lip. Finally, she nodded with quiet determination. I'll help you, she said firmly. I'll take the risk, but I can't let something like this happen. I'll do what I can to get those documents. Juliet felt a lump in her throat, a mix of gratitude and fear. She knew Clara's help was crucial, but she was also aware of the danger involved. If Cristiano found out what they were doing, the consequences could be dire. As they left the cafe, Juliet realized she no longer felt alone. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she had allies, people willing to risk themselves for her. But time was still ticking, and Cristiano's threat continued to grow. Now, with Clara on her side, Juliet's plan for revenge was starting to take shape, but she also knew that every step had to be calculated down to the last detail. Juliet was sitting on her bed, her gaze fixed on the open window that let in the soft night breeze. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the distance, like tiny beacons of hope in a world that, until recently, had seemed completely dark to her. The sound of the wind through the trees calmed her, but inside her was a storm of emotions, anger, fear, but above all, a growing determination. Her plan was forming with more clarity than ever. She knew time was limited and that she needed to act soon, but also that every step had to be calculated. Since the meeting with Clara, everything had changed. Clara had kept her promise. She had handed over confidential documents that proved the irregularities in the report Cristiano and Dr. Montalvo were preparing. It was a crucial blow in the battle that was just beginning. However, it wasn't enough. They needed more, and Juliet knew the real battle wouldn't just be fought on paper, but in the minds of those around them. She had to weaken Cristiano from within, make him believe his control over her was total. That night, as she prepared her plan, Cristiano entered the room, his usual fake smile plastered on his face. "How are you feeling today?" he asked with a fake tenderness that Juliet had learned to read. "I think I'm feeling better," Juliet responded softly, pretending her mind was still foggy, that she was still the vulnerable and confused woman he had molded. Cristiano watched her closely, as he always did, looking for any sign of resistance. Finding nothing out of place, he sat next to her and stroked her hair. "Dr. Montalvo will come tomorrow to evaluate you." He paused, watching for her reaction. "It's just a formality, but it's important that you keep cooperating." Juliet felt a surge of anger beneath the surface, but she smiled weakly. "I will, Cristiano. I'll do whatever is necessary." Her husband nodded, satisfied, and got up to leave the room. However, before crossing the door, he stopped. "I love you, Juliet. Everything I do is for you," he said with a sincerity that only someone who mastered the art of manipulation could fake. Juliet didn't respond. She watched him leave the room, and once she was sure she was alone, her expression completely changed. She was no longer the broken woman Cristiano thought he controlled. Now, she was a woman fighting for her life, for her truth. And she had one advantage. Cristiano underestimated her. The next morning, when Dr. Montalvo arrived at the house, Juliet was already prepared. Her plan was simple but effective: continue playing the role of the submissive and unstable wife, give Cristiano and the doctor exactly what they wanted to see, while Clara worked from inside the hospital to dismantle the fraud they were orchestrating. Dr. Montalvo was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a professional but cold expression. He had made previous visits, always backing Cristiano's claims about Juliet's mental state, but now, She knew his true role in all of this was much darker. "Juliet, how have you been feeling lately?" the doctor asked as he sat in front of her in the living room. Juliet lowered her gaze, feigning nervousness, and responded in a soft voice. "Sometimes. I feel lost, like I can't remember things. I don't know what's real and what isn't." Cristiano, who was standing behind the doctor, slowly nodded, as if confirming his wife's words. However, Juliet noticed the satisfaction in his eyes. Everything was going according to his plan. The doctor took a few notes and continued with his questions, each one designed to reinforce the narrative of her mental illness. Juliet answered each one precisely, following the script Cristiano had imposed on her, but in her mind, the strategy was clear: gain their trust and then tear down their entire castle of lies. After the evaluation, Dr. Montalvo closed his notebook and turned to Cristiano. "I think it's clear that Juliet needs a more extensive evaluation," he said, his voice professional. "I'll recommend her admission for proper treatment. This is what's best for her well-being." Juliet felt her heart beat faster. She knew this moment was key. Any misstep could reveal her true intentions, but she couldn't afford to make a mistake. "If that's what's best." "I trust you, Cristiano," Juliet said, her voice trembling but submissive, looking at her husband with a mix of fake submission and desperation. Cristiano smiled, and Juliet could see the satisfaction on his face. To him, everything was going exactly as planned. But Juliet knew something he didn't. His downfall was closer than he imagined. When the doctor left, Cristiano approached her, knelt beside her, and took her hands. "I promise everything will get better, love. You just need to trust me a little more." Juliet looked him in the eyes, feigning vulnerability, and nodded. "I will, Cristiano. I trust you." That night, when Cristiano left the house to finalize details with the doctor, Juliet seized the moment. She called Sophia and explained what had happened. She knew the admission to the hospital was closer than ever, but she also knew Clara had been working to gather evidence from inside the hospital. Time was limited, but the key piece of her plan was about to fall into place. The next day, Clara arrived with urgent news. She had gained access to the hospital's internal files, where she found more than just the false report from Dr. Montalvo. There were also records linking Cristiano to other similar cases of manipulation, where he had succeeded in having women committed to take control of their assets. This was much bigger than Juliet had imagined. Cristiano wasn't just betraying her, he had been building a web of deceit for years. "This is enough to destroy him," Clara said, handing over the documents to Juliet and Sophia. "But we have to be careful. If Cristiano finds out we know this, he won't hesitate to act quickly to destroy the evidence and you." Juliet felt a mix of fear and relief. She finally had what she needed to bring down Cristiano, but she also knew the danger was greater than ever. Every move had to be perfect. "We can't wait any longer," Sophia said urgently. "We need to expose him before he has a chance to react." Juliet nodded. She knew the moment had come. The revenge she had been planning for weeks was about to begin. Now everything depended on one decisive blow to bring down Cristiano's entire castle of lies. But one thing was clear: she was no longer the victim. Now she was in control. With Clara and Sophia by her side, Juliet began to plot the final steps of her plan. She knew Cristiano's downfall would be devastating, but she also knew it was the only way to regain her freedom, her life, and the justice that had been taken from her. The time for lies was coming to an end. The next day, Juliet woke up early, before dawn, while the rest of the city still slept under the dark mantle of the night. She walked barefoot through the house in silence, the cold floor beneath her feet, trying to calm the thoughts that whirled endlessly in her mind. The plan was in motion, but the sense of impending danger enveloped her like a veil. She knew they were playing with fire, and that one mistake could destroy everything. She looked out the window towards the horizon, where the first ray of light began to peek through. This new day brought with it the promise of justice, but also the risk of a final confrontation with Cristiano. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. Juliet knew that the calm before the storm was always the most tense. The door to the house slowly opened, and Sophia entered, her face tired but determined. She carried a briefcase full of documents that Clara had obtained from the hospital, the final piece of the puzzle Juliet needed to take down Cristiano. "Are you ready?" Sophia asked, sitting down in front of her at the dining table. Juliet nodded slowly, pressing her lips together. "I am. It's now or never." Sophia pulled the documents from the briefcase and laid them out on the table. The papers rustled in the silence, each one a testament to the deceit and betrayal Cristiano had built over the years. "It's all here," Sophia said, pointing to the evidence. The falsified reports, the money transfers, the manipulated testimonies. Clara did an incredible job. Cristiano won't be able to deny it. When all this comes to light, his career, his reputation, everything he's built will crumble. Juliet looked at the documents, but her mind was elsewhere, remembering the moments when she had trusted Cristiano blindly, those early years when she thought he was her refuge, her unwavering support. Now, all that was left of that illusion was a deep bitterness, but beside it, there was something more, a flame of revenge, of justice, burning stronger than ever. "How are we going to do this?" Juliet asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Sophia gave a slight smile. "I have a contact in the press who can help us expose everything. But first, we need to make sure Cristiano has no chance of escaping." Juliet nodded again, her mind calculating each move. She knew Cristiano was cunning and dangerous. If he suspected anything, he might try to destroy the evidence or flee. They had to catch him off guard. "Clara has given us access to the hospital," Sophia continued. "This afternoon we'll meet her. That's where Cristiano will sign the final report with Dr. Montalvo. That will be our moment." The details settled in Juliet's mind like pieces on a chessboard. She knew the hospital would be the perfect setting. They would have not only the evidence, but also real-time proof of the manipulation. Everything had to go perfectly. Hours later, as the sun already illuminated the house, Cristiano arrived. His presence filled the room with his typical arrogance. He wore an impeccable white shirt and that smile Juliet had learned to hate. "Today is an important day, love," he said, approaching her and taking her hand. "We're going to see Dr. Montalvo. I'm sure everything will go well." Juliet returned a weak smile, hiding her contempt behind a mask of submission. "I'll do whatever you think is best," she murmured. Cristiano nodded, satisfied. He had no idea what was about to happen. The drive to the hospital was silent. Juliet stared out the window, watching the landscape change around her. Each mile brought her closer to the end of this nightmare, but also filled her with an anxiety that tightened her chest. Next to her, Cristiano drove with confidence, as if he had already won. When they arrived at the hospital, Clara was waiting for them at the entrance. Her face was serious, but her eyes conveyed calm. She knew what was at stake and was ready to help them. "Everything is ready," Clara said, guiding them through the hospital corridors. "Dr. Montalvo will see you in his office in a few minutes." Juliet took a deep breath as she followed Clara, with Cristiano walking beside her, oblivious to the storm about to break. The hospital was quiet, the sound of footsteps echoing down the empty halls. When they reached the doctor's office, Juliet felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. She knew this moment would change everything. Dr. Montalvo greeted them with a cold smile, adjusting his glasses as he sat behind his desk. "Juliet, Cristiano, thank you for coming," he said in a voice that tried to be reassuring but only heightened the tension in the air. "We've prepared the final report. I believe the step is necessary for your recovery, Juliet." Cristiano nodded and sat down, smiling confidently. Everything seemed to be under his control. However, Clara, who had stayed by the door, exchanged a quick glance with Sophia, who was already prepared for the next move. "Before you sign anything, there's something you need to know," Sophia suddenly said, breaking the silence. Cristiano frowned and looked at Sophia in surprise. "What is this about?" he asked, his tone starting to show irritation. Sophia, without losing her composure, pulled the documents from the briefcase she had brought and placed them on Dr. Montalvo's desk. "These are the records showing how you falsified Juliet's medical reports," she said, her voice clear and firm. "And there's also proof that you've done this before, Cristiano. Manipulating women to make them seem unstable, taking their money and destroying their lives." Cristiano's face twisted into a mixture of disbelief and rage. He jumped up from his chair. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, trying to maintain his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about, but this is a setup." Juliet, who had remained silent until then, slowly stood up, looking directly into Cristiano's eyes. Her heart pounded, but her voice was firm. "We know everything, Cristiano. Your lies, your manipulation, all of it. You can't make me out to be crazy anymore." Cristiano narrowed his eyes at her, like a cornered animal. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Dr. Montalvo, visibly nervous, began flipping through the documents, his face paling as he read. This can't be," the doctor stammered, feeling control slip away. "I didn't know anything about this." Sophia interrupted him firmly. "Oh, you knew. You knew exactly what you were doing. But now, the truth will come out. We've informed the press. They're on their way." Cristiano, seeing his plan collapse before his eyes, stepped toward Juliet, his face filled with fury. "You'll pay for this," he shouted, but before he could get any closer, Clara intervened, calling the hospital security. The guards quickly entered the room, and Cristiano, furious, was restrained as he screamed and struggled to break free. Juliet looked at him one last time, no longer with fear, but with a deep calm. "It's over, Cristiano." For the first time in weeks, Juliet felt like she could finally breathe again. Juliet left the hospital, feeling the cool air on her face for the first time in what felt like years. Every step she took brought her closer to freedom, although the weight of what had just happened still hung over her shoulders. The images of Cristiano yelling, his empty threats as the guards restrained him, kept playing in her mind. Yet, amid that chaos, something inside her began to heal. It was as if the thick fog that had clouded her life for so long was finally lifting, allowing the light to slowly seep in. Sophia walked beside her in silence, aware of Juliet's need to process what had happened. A few meters away, Clara was speaking with some reporters who had arrived, handing them documents that would expose Cristiano publicly. The truth was finally being revealed. "I never thought this day would come," Juliet murmured, more to herself than to Sophia, as she looked at the gray evening sky. Sophia, always vigilant, smiled slightly and took Juliet's hand. "You did it, Juliet. Against all odds, you did it." Juliet let out a deep sigh. The relief was palpable, but the fight wasn't completely over. Though Cristiano had been unmasked and arrested, the damage he had caused wouldn't disappear so easily. It wasn't just about the physical or emotional scars, but the fact that someone she had loved deeply had betrayed her trust in the most cruel way possible. "What now?" Juliet asked, her voice cracking with uncertainty. Sophia looked at her with a mix of compassion and firmness. "Now, it's up to you. You're in control of your life again, Juliet. Cristiano is out of the picture. He no longer has any power over you. You can start over, build whatever you want." Sophia's words, though comforting, also frightened Juliet. She had spent so long under Cristiano's control that the idea of being free, of having the power to choose, was both liberating and terrifying. Suddenly, Clara approached with a worried expression. "Juliet," she said, lowering her voice, "we have a problem." Juliet frowned, the relief she had just started to feel immediately vanishing. "What is it?" "Cristiano has secured a renowned lawyer," Clara explained. "He's trying to claim that it was all a misunderstanding, that you were unstable and his only intention was to help you. They're preparing a defense to get him out on bail and avoid a trial for fraud and manipulation." Juliet's heart sank. Although she had expected some resistance, she wasn't prepared for the possibility that Cristiano would try to take control of the narrative again, manipulating the truth once more. She knew he wouldn't give up easily, that he would fight until the very end to protect his image and his power. "I can't believe it," Juliet said, her throat tight. After everything he's done, he's still trying to get away with it. Sophia squeezed Juliet's arm firmly. We're not going to let that happen. We have enough evidence to bury him, Juliet. But it's true that with his influence, things could get complicated. We need to do something to make sure he doesn't have even the slightest chance of escaping justice. Juliet felt a wave of helplessness mixed with anger. But just as she began to lose hope, something inside her reignited. This wasn't the Juliet that Cristiano had tried to destroy. This was a woman who had survived the worst of hells and wasn't going to let him defeat her now. No, she said, with more strength than she had felt in weeks. I'm not going to let him control me again. If he wants a fight, then I'll fight with everything I've got. Clara and Sophia exchanged glances, impressed by Juliet's renewed determination. They knew she was ready for whatever it would take. What's the plan? Clara asked, leaning toward Juliet, ready for any action necessary. Juliet took a deep breath, looking at her friends. Inside her, the fear had given way to a fierce clarity. First, we need to make the whole truth public. I want the world to know what Cristiano has done, not just to me, but to the other women he's manipulated. If he wants to fight in court, let him, but he won't escape the court of public opinion. We'll expose every lie, every fraud, and we won't let his influence protect him. Sophia smiled, satisfied with Juliet's decision. I like the sound of that. I've got contacts in the media who would love to make this story front-page news. Clara nodded, understanding the importance of what they were about to do. I can also help from the hospital. With the documents we've gathered, we can bring in more witnesses. If we apply enough pressure, the system will have no choice but to listen. Juliet felt a spark of hope. This was the path forward. Cristiano might have resources, but she had the truth and people who believed in her. And that, ultimately, would be her most powerful weapon. That very night, Sophia and Juliet began planning how to spread the story. They contacted renowned journalists, offered interviews, and shared the incriminating documents they had obtained. The media impact was immediate. Social media filled with comments about the case, and soon Cristiano's name was on everyone's lips, but not for his accomplishments or status, but for the crimes he had committed. As public pressure mounted, Cristiano's defense strategy began to crumble. Every day, more dark details emerged, not just about what he had done to Juliet, but about his pattern of manipulation and abuse over the years. The tide was turning, and now he was at the center of a storm of outrage and condemnation. Juliet, for the first time in a long while, felt like she was regaining her power. Though the pain was still there, she was no longer a victim. Now she was the one controlling the narrative. A few days later, she received an unexpected call. It was Cristiano's lawyer. Juliet, he said in a serious tone, my client is willing to negotiate. If you decide to drop the charges, Cristiano is prepared to make concessions. Juliet took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. For a second, she remembered all the pain, the fear, the sleepless nights, the doubts about her own sanity. And then, she remembered who she was now. Tell Cristiano, she said, her voice firm and unwavering, that there's nothing to negotiate. He will face the truth, and I won't back down. She hung up the phone, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Sophia, who was nearby, looked at her with pride. You've won, Juliet, she said, hugging her tightly. Juliet hugged her back, tears in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of victory. I've taken back my life, Juliet whispered as the weight of the past months began to lift. Now I'm free. And for the first time, those words didn't just sound true. They felt real, like a door that had finally opened to a new life. Days later, Juliet sat on the park bench, surrounded by the serenity of a spring day. The new leaves on the trees glistened under the sunlight, and the air smelled of rebirth, of new possibilities. The world kept turning, and for the first time in a long while, Juliet felt like she belonged to it again. Her fingers toyed with a fallen leaf, and a soft smile crossed her lips. It was a day like any other, but for her, it symbolized the beginning of something much deeper, the life she could now live without fear. Next to her, Sophia sat in silence, respecting her friend's moment of introspection. She knew Juliet needed time to process what she had achieved. They had traveled a long road together, facing obstacles, uncovering the truth, and finally watching Cristiano fall. The trial had ended just weeks ago, with a sentence that not only sent Cristiano to prison, but also publicly cleared Juliet's name. She was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. She was a survivor, a woman who had taken control of her destiny. "How do you feel?" Sophia asked softly, breaking the silence with the warmth that had always defined her. Juliet looked up, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and something deeper, a serenity she hadn't felt in years. "Free," Juliet replied with a smile. "For the first time, truly free." The words flowed from her lips so naturally that they surprised even her. For so long, she had felt that the world was a cage, each day a new chain that bound her a little more. But now, after everything that had happened, she had not only regained her physical freedom, but also her emotional one. She had broken the chains Cristiano had placed around her mind and heart. "It's incredible how life changes, isn't it?" Juliet continued, looking at the flowers beginning to bloom around them. "A few months ago, I couldn't have imagined myself sitting here, feeling that everything was okay. I thought my life was over, that my future was controlled by someone else. But now I feel like I can breathe again." Sophia looked at her with pride, knowing how hard her friend had fought to reach this point. She had witnessed every tear, every moment of doubt and despair. But she had also seen the strength Juliet had found within herself, a strength that, at first, even she didn't know she had. "You've always been strong, Juliet. You just needed to remember who you were," Sophia said with a smile. "Cristiano tried to take that from you, but what he didn't understand is that he could never destroy your true spirit." Juliet nodded slowly, reflecting on those words. It was true. There had been a time when she thought Cristiano had won everything, that her life no longer belonged to her. But the truth was, even though he had tried to manipulate her, the essence of who she was had never been completely lost. It had just been waiting for the right moment to resurface. "It's funny," Juliet said, looking up at the blue sky. "When it all began, I thought the pain was unbearable, that there was no way out. But now I see that pain was the catalyst for something much greater. It made me stronger, more aware of who I am. And although I would never justify what he did to me, I can say that I learned more about myself in those dark moments than in my entire life before." Sophia took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Life always tests us, Juliet. What matters isn't how many times we fall, but how we rise. And you've risen, stronger and braver than ever." Juliet smiled in gratitude. Sophia's words resonated deeply within her. She had learned to forgive herself for not seeing the signs earlier, for trusting someone who didn't deserve it. Now she knew that life wasn't about avoiding pain, but about facing it, about turning it into something that makes us stronger, more resilient. At that moment, a group of children ran past them, laughing and chasing one another. Juliet watched them and felt a comforting warmth in her heart. Life went on, with its ups and downs, but also with its moments of pure joy. "What are you going to do now?" Sophia asked, curious about Juliet's plans. Juliet paused for a moment, but not in a troubled way, rather as someone reflecting on the endless possibilities the future had to offer. "I'm not sure yet," she answered honestly. "But I know I want to start over, rebuild my life. I want to travel, visit places I've always dreamed of, write my story, but not the story of what happened to me, the story of how I rose from it all." Sophia smiled, seeing the spark of excitement in Juliet's eyes. "It'll be an incredible story. And you deserve it. You deserve to live fully, without shadows." Juliet nodded, knowing she had all the time in the world to figure out what came next. She was no longer in a hurry, no longer afraid. She knew the future wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace with open arms. "I've learned something important," Juliet said, her voice filled with wisdom. "Sometimes, the worst experiences can reveal our best qualities. They show us what we're made of." I don't know if I'm stronger than before, but I know I'm more aware of what I'm capable of now. And that's something no one can ever take away from me. Sophia looked at her with admiration and said, "That's a lesson many people never get to learn. But you did, Juliet. You faced the worst and came out of it not only stronger, but more complete." Juliet smiled, her eyes glowing with a new light, a light of hope and renewal. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm ready to live." As the two friends stood up from the bench and began walking through the park, Juliet felt that each step she took was an affirmation of her new life. There were no more chains, no more shadows. Now, there was only a clear path ahead, full of possibilities. The past had been difficult, yes, but she had left that pain behind, turned her suffering into wisdom, her sadness into strength. And now, as she walked under the bright sun, she knew that her story, a story of struggle, pain, and finally triumph, was not only hers, but one that would inspire others to find their own strength. Juliet smiled, feeling freedom in every breath, in every beat of her heart. Because now she knew, without a doubt, that life, even with its darkest moments, always offers the chance to start over. And she was more than ready to embrace it. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to leave a comment about how it made you feel. And if you've experienced a similar situation of betrayal, I'd love for you to share your valuable opinion. I'd be honored if you leave a like, share the video with a friend or family member, and subscribe to the channel. Don't miss the next surprising story that's appearing on your screen right now. We have guaranteed entertainment exclusively for you. See you in the next video.